Let's go ahead and start. San Mateo County Planning Commission meeting of October 23rd, 2019 will please come to order. Please rise and join me for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Janet, may I have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Hansen? Here. Commissioner Ketchum?
Here.
Commissioner Santa Cruz?
Here.
Commissioner Ramirez?
Here.
Chair Gupta?
Here.
And staff is represented by Monowitz and Fox.
Before we go to the main agenda items, are there any members of public who would like to address the commission on matters that are not on the agenda today? Do we have any speaker cards, Janet?
None.
Hearing none, public hearing is closed. Let's move forward. Next we have on the agenda consideration of the minutes of the Planning Commission meetings of September 25 and October 9, 2019. I understand there are some corrections, minor corrections to the minutes of October 9 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the corrected minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Those who oppose, say nay.
I wasn't here that day, so I just absent
For which one?
for the October 9.
For October 9. So motion passes unanimously for the minutes of September 25 meeting and October 9, 4-1, Commissioner Santa Cruz abstaining. Thank you. We move on to first regular agenda item. Janet, would you please read the item in the record?
One moment. Item number 1, owner applicant, Mel Casey, file number PLN 2017-00010, location Canyon Lane, Emerald Lake Hills.
So we have Summer here to do her presentation.
Good morning, Chair Gupta and Commissioners. My name is Summer Burleson. I'm the project planner with the San Mateo County Planning and Building Department, and I'm here this morning to share with you an informational item that's been agendized to introduce the draft environmental impact report for the Canyon Lane Roadway and single-family residence improvement project. I thought I'd start off with the staff's recommendation for today, just so that we can establish expectation of the Planning Commission for this item. This is an informational item. No decision is being requested by the Planning Commission today. We'll be presenting a summary of the draft DIR, and we're recommending that the Planning Commission receive staff's presentation and provide an opportunity for public comments. My presentation this morning is going to include an overview of the environmental review process, an overview of the project itself, and then summarize key conclusions from the draft DIR. And I emphasize the word summarize because it is a lengthy document, and so I've tried to boil that down into a concise presentation here. but it is over 400 pages, and it is available online for review. I'll identify the next steps in the environmental review process for this project, and then we would seek any public comments. So just to start off, Sequa is the state's primary environmental protection law that requires state and local agencies to identify the significant environmental impacts of their actions and to avoid or mitigate those impacts if feasible. It establishes a duty for public agencies to avoid or minimize environmental damage where feasible. It requires a designation of lead agency and responsible agency, where lead agency is the agency that makes the determination on what level of environmental review is necessary for a project. And it does not dictate project approval or denial. So jumping in, the project is located on the eastern border of the Emerald Lake Hills community, which is an unincorporated community in the county. The project area is situated within a hillside canyon east of Lower Emerald Lake that you see here on this map, and west of Garrett Park, which is located within the city of Redwood City. It's surrounded by single-family residential development that's scattered throughout the adjacent hills of the Emerald Lake Hills community. Canyon Lane is a relatively level 10-foot wide private gravel roadway, and you'll see it in a photo coming up. It commences within the city of Redwood City at Glenwood Avenue and extends approximately 550 feet westward before crossing into the county of San Mateo's jurisdiction, and then continuing to its terminus in the county. So it is a portion of the project, the front portion of the project where roadway improvements are proposed is within the city of Redwood City, and the remaining portion is in the county. And on this map, the city-county boundary is designated by the yellow vertical line. So the project itself includes roadway improvements, and it would consist of converting the 10-foot wide gravel roadway into a 20-foot wide paved roadway. It also includes a single span bridge that would cross an intermittent creek that runs along the north side of Canyon Lane, and installing an 8-inch water main along Canyon Lane to provide water service and fire protection. And that water main would commence at Glenwood Avenue, and then it would loop down. So it would run westward along Canyon Lane, and then as you see in this illustration, it makes a bend southward to loop back into Vista Drive. And the loop system is necessary for water flow and quality. The project also includes the development of one single-family residence on the parcel shown here on the south side of Canyon Lane in orange. The residence would be a 3-level single-family residence, approximately 3,800 square feet in total size. The site improvements for the parcel would be typical of those expected for single-family residential development on a hillside, including site retaining walls, drainage, stormwater drainage facilities, and grading for the house site would consist of 2,500 cubic yards of grading, mostly cut, to accommodate the residents, and the removal of 11 trees. And I should mention the roadway improvements would also consist of grading the majority being cut, about 1,200 cubic yards of grading. And the roadway improvements would include the removal of 34 trees that range in size from 7 inches to 29 inches in diameter at breast height. So these are just some photos of the area. Both of these photos, taken from different vantage points, show the project areas in the background of both of these photos. And this is the existing condition of Canyon Lane. As I mentioned, it's a private gravel roadway, about 10 feet wide. Some additional photos as you continue down Canyon Lane. The one residence site that's proposed for development in the left photo is the site is on the right side of the roadway. So as I mentioned, Sequa requires agency designations be assigned to clarify the roles and responsibilities throughout the Sequa environmental review process. So a lead agency is a public agency which has the principal responsibility for approving a project, and for purposes of this project, that would be the County of San Mateo. And all other public agencies which have discretionary approval power over the project are considered responsible agencies. And in this case, for this project, that would include the City of Redwood City as well as San Mateo LAFCO. And the City of Redwood City and San Mateo LAFCO are considered responsible agencies because there is the need for an outside service agreement for the City of Redwood City to extend water service outside of their boundaries to serve the project area. As lead agency, the county completed an initial assessment of the potential significant impacts for the project and made the determination that an environmental impact report was necessary for the project. An environmental impact report, or referred to as an EIR, it describes and analyzes the significant environmental effects of a project and discusses ways to mitigate or avoid those effects. It does not control a public agency's ultimate discretion on the project, and it does require a statement of overriding considerations should a public agency decide to approve a project that will cause one or more significant and unavoidable effects on the environment. The EIR for this project will be used to inform decision makers, yourselves, when considering discretionary action on the project permit applications for this project that include a grading permit for the improvements to Canyon Lane, construction of the single-span bridge, and construction of the one residence, design review for construction of the single-family residence, a variance to allow grading in excess of 1,000 cubic yards for the single-family residence, and the outside service agreement to extend city water service outside of the city's boundary, which is the action that's required by the City of Redwood City and San Mateo LAFCO. So we have hired consultants, SWCA consultants, environmental consultants, to assist us in preparing the environmental review for this project. And in December of 2018, we issued a notice of preparation to the State Clearinghouse and to interested agencies and organizations and the public. And that followed a 30-day public comment period for the collection of comments on the scope of the environmental impact report. We also held a scoping meeting during that 30-day comment period. So we held the scoping meeting on December 18th, and that has led us to the draft EIR that has been issued. It was issued on September 25th, and it runs a 45-day public comment period, which will end on November 11th. And a notice of availability was issued to interested agencies, organizations, as well as the public. The draft DIR contains the necessary components for conformance with the Sequa guidelines, and it's organized as shown on this slide. It consists of an executive summary, an introduction, a project description, the analysis of potential impacts and mitigation measures. It includes an alternatives analysis as required by Sequa and other Sequa considerations, and report preparers and appendices. And that's the typical framework for an EIR. So the project's primary objectives for this project are to improve Canyon Lane in order to facilitate routine and emergency access to 12 parcels that would become developable, to provide housing and the opportunity for future housing on lots associated with the project on a site that is zoned for single-family residential development, and to assist in maximizing housing opportunities in the county while maintaining the predominantly single-family residential character of the community. So Sequa guidelines requires an EIR to discuss growth-inducing impacts of the project, which could be caused by projects that foster either economic or population growth, the construction of additional housing in the area, or removes obstacles to population growth. For the purposes of this project, since it would facilitate the future development of other parcels along Canyon Lane by the roadway and utility improvements, that potential future development is considered throughout the EIR as a growth-inducing impact. No development on the other parcels is proposed at this time. It's just the one single-family residence, but future development of the other parcels would be subject to additional Sequa review to determine if the potential impacts for that future development were considered fully and adequately in this EIR, or if additional environmental review would be required. So there are 19 environmental resource topics that are discussed in the draft EIR as listed here. So Sequa requires that once analysis be completed for each environmental resource, that a level of impact be prescribed to that topic, and that would be a level of impact that would result from the project. And it's using the following categories here: so significant and unavoidable, less than significant with mitigation, less than significant impact, and no impact. And so each of those 19 topics include a classification for within one of these categories. So the draft EIR finds that the project has the potential to result in significant impacts that are unavoidable to two resource topics. One is biological resources, and this is in the specific to the potential impact to San Mateo woolly sunflower. So there is suitable habitat in the coastal oak forest for bent flowered fiddleneck and San Mateo woolly sunflower. These are two rare species. Plant surveys were conducted during the blooming season of this year, and neither of the plant species were found in the project area. It was determined that there is a low potential for occurrence of these rare plant species. However, any loss of San Mateo woolly sunflower would be considered a significant impact due to the rarity of this species. And for that low but potential reasoning, this has been identified as a potential significant and unavoidable impact should the species be found. Mitigation measures have been included that would require pre-construction surveys for these species prior to construction, and avoidance if possible. The other significant and unavoidable impact that was determined from the draft DIR is relative to hydrology and water quality resources. There is a potential for release of pollutants from the project in the event of a catastrophic failure of the dam. The Emerald Lake Dam, which is shown in one of the maps here on the screen, is located about 850 feet uphill of the project area. And the project area is within the dam's inundation zone. The dam is inspected on an annual basis, and risk of catastrophic failure is considered to be low. However, the project area is also approximately 1.5 miles away from the peninsula segment of the San Andreas Fault. So in the event of a catastrophic dam failure, a majority of the project area would be inundated, as shown in the inundation map on the right-hand side of this slide, resulting in flooding of Canyon Lane and to any residences along Canyon Lane. And that could cause pollutants from the project to be released and enter into the Redwood Creek system and eventually the San Francisco Bay. The applicant and current future property owners along Canyon Lane would not have the ability to ensure that the dam would not fail in the event of a catastrophic event or in the event of an earthquake. And so the release of pollutants, if the project were to be inundated, would be considered significant and unavoidable. Less than significant impacts with mitigation proposed in the EIR include other biological resources, potential impacts basically to special status plant and animal species, and mitigation measures are recommended that include pre-construction surveys, construction schedule restrictions, and avoidance when feasible. And the draft DIR finds a number of resources beyond the biological resources that the project would have a less than significant impact on, provided mitigations are implemented. And those consist of aesthetics. So the project would alter the visual character of the surrounding undeveloped area by the development of residences. The project would also slightly increase the ambient noise or ambient light levels in the area, and so mitigation measures have been included for landscaping and light fixture plans. In the area of air quality, construction activities for the project would generate emissions from mobile and stationary construction equipment, exhaust and fugitive dust from grading activities during construction. And so mitigation measures are recommended to reduce fugitive dust emissions. And those measures are measures outlined by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, construction mitigation measures, practices that include watering exposed surfaces daily, limiting vehicle speeds on unpaved roads, and proper maintenance and tuning of construction equipment. With regards to cultural and tribal cultural resources, there was a cultural resource assessment that was completed for the project. There were no significant cultural resources found in the project area. The county did send consultation letters to 6 Native American tribes that are known to be traditionally or culturally affiliated with the project area, and no responses were received from any of those tribes for further consultation. Mitigation measures have been included in the unanticipated event that any cultural resources are discovered throughout construction. Mitigation measures would include stopping the project and seeking professional consultation in those areas of expertise. Regarding geology and soils, the project has the potential to cause adverse impacts to people and structures involving strong seismic ground shaking and landslide. There is an active fault in the region, and there's an active shallow landslide located along the proposed water main near Vista Drive, as shown on this map in the orange. Mitigation measures are recommended for engineering to adhere to the recommendations of the geotechnical site investigation report for the project, and would include replacing the landslide deposit in the area of the water main. Greenhouse gas emissions was evaluated relative to the project, and the project does have the potential to generate greenhouse gas emissions during construction through use of construction equipment as well as worker vehicles. Mitigation measures are included in the draft DIR to limit construction vehicles through practices such as encouraging carpooling for workers outside of the county area, as well as for limiting construction vehicle and equipment idling to the extent feasible, and requiring off-road construction diesel engines to meet California emission standards. With regards to hazards and hazardous materials, the project would temporarily involve the routine use of hazardous material through construction to operate and maintain construction equipment and machinery. Additionally, paint would be used for interior and exterior surfaces of the single-family residence that's proposed. The draft DIR recommends mitigation measures to implement a construction safety plan to minimize the exposure of people and the environment to potentially hazardous materials. In the arena of noise, the project could generate substantial temporary increases in ambient noise levels in the area due to construction. The highest noise levels are expected during excavation and grading activities. Mitigation measures Mitigation measures are recommended in the draft DIR to restrict noise generated equipment use. And in the arena of wildfire, there was some fire behavior modeling that was completed for the draft DIR, and that found that 93% of burnable fuels in the project area have a low to moderate spread rate, a low flame length, and a fine fuel load, which would result in low to moderate intensity fuel burn. Construction of the residence would use ignition-resistant material as required per building codes, and incorporate design features to reduce wildfire risks in compliance with CAL FIRE requirements for maintaining defensible space zones. Potential ignition sources would actually be increased during construction activities due to the use of internal combustion engines associated with vehicles and equipment used throughout construction. And so mitigation measures are recommended to implement safety control measures, to develop a fire awareness and avoidance plan, and for roadside fuel reduction to minimize the potential risk of wildfire throughout construction. Moving on to the category of less than significant impact, where no mitigation was found to be necessary. This is for the resources of energy, land use and planning, population and housing, public services, recreation, transportation, utilities, and service systems. And the draft EIR finds that the project would have less than significant impact on these resources, either because the project's required conformance with zoning or building codes or other established codes and standards relied on in order to issue permits for a project like this would themselves minimize any potential adverse impacts to a less than significant level, or that existing public services and facilities would be adequate to serve the project and the project's increased demands. And resources that the project would have no impact on are agriculture and forestry resources and mineral resources, as neither of these characteristics occur in this area. The Sequa guidelines requires a draft EIR to study project alternatives to help kind of foster informed decisions by decision makers. Project alternatives are included in this draft EIR. Project alternatives would describe a range of reasonable alternatives to the project or to the location of the project, which would feasibly attain most of the project objectives, but would avoid or substantially lessen any significant effects. Project alternatives evaluate the comparative merits of the alternatives relative to the project itself. It must include a no project alternative as required pursuant to Sequa, and Sequa does require an environmentally superior alternative be identified and another alternative from the remaining alternatives to be identified as the environmentally superior alternative if the primary environmentally superior alternative is the no project alternative. And so the environmentally superior alternative basically is the alternative that would most effectively reduce impacts while meeting project objectives. So in the draft EIR, we've analyzed two alternatives as well as the no project alternative. Alternative one is a reduced roadway alternative, which would limit the length of the roadway improvements to accommodate the proposed residents and for emergency vehicle turnaround purposes. It was assessed relative and compared to the project evaluation of impacts, and the reduced roadway alternative would have reduced environmental impacts compared to the project. And this alternative only partially meets the project objectives. It would fall short of meeting project objectives related to maximizing housing opportunities in the county and providing opportunity for future residential development in the area, which is zoned for residences, single-family residences. Alternative two is the annexation alternative, and this alternative would be subject to, it would annex the property and the project area into Redwood City prior to development. So development then would occur within the city of Redwood City's jurisdiction and under their codes and standards. The city's standards does allow, in terms of zoning, would allow for slightly larger residences to be built based on their lot coverage standards relative to the county standards. That may result in some greater impacts to some environmental resources that were analyzed in the draft EIR. However, it was found that there would be no additional new significant impacts than those already identified in the draft EIR for the project under this alternative. And it would generally meet all of the project objectives as well. And then the third alternative is the no project alternative, which basically keeps existing conditions as they are. No development would occur. Development could be pursued at a future time, subject to extension of roadway and services and pursuant to obtaining all permits that are necessary, including going through Sequa review at a future date. The no project alternative does fail to meet any of the project objectives, as there would be no development. So in determining the environmentally superior alternative, which again is the alternative that most effectively reduces impacts while meeting project objectives, well, the no project alternative, it would fail to meet any of the basic project objectives, but it obviously would reduce impacts since there would be no development. And the alternative one is actually the environmentally superior alternative. That is the reduced roadway alternative. It does not reduce significant and unavoidable impacts that have already been identified for the project. And it does only partially meet project objectives, but it would reduce impacts more than the current project, and it would reduce impacts beyond what alternative 2, the annexation alternative, would accomplish. So alternative 1 is the environmentally superior alternative, which again is the reduced roadway alternative. It should be noted, though, that the significant and unavoidable impacts that I mentioned earlier regarding the biological resources and the hydrology relative to the dam, except for the no project alternative and the other 2 alternatives for the reduced roadway and the annexation, those are still identified as significant and unavoidable impacts. So neither of those alternatives would mitigate or reduce those significant and unavoidable impacts. Those would still be valid. And other considerations that Sequa guidelines requires the draft DIR to consider, again, as I mentioned earlier, the growth-inducing impacts. And this is considered in the EIR through the evaluation throughout each environmental resource topic section of the future developable parcels that would result from the project occurring. Significant irreversible environmental changes. The draft DIR considers changes that could result if the project would involve a large commitment of non-renewable resources or wasteful use of resources. Non-renewable energy consumption could occur in the form of consumption from production of construction materials, fuel used by construction equipment, typical household purposes, and the energy associated with producing goods and services that may be consumed by the residents and future residences. Irreversible commitments of limited resources could result from project implementation through use of lumber, metals, water consumption, loss of natural gas. Construction and operational related energy consumption and use of non-renewable resources would be proportional to the size of the development. And the project would incorporate energy efficiency and conservation design measures as required by the California Green Building Standards and local construction and demolition debris recycling ordinance requirements. And so therefore the draft DIR has found that the project impacts on significant irreversible environmental changes would be less than significant. The EIR also includes a section at the end that evaluates cumulative impacts, which is a requirement under the Sequa guidelines. The cumulative impacts include past, present, and probable future projects. And so all projects within Redwood City within 1 mile of the project site, and all projects in the county within the entirety of the Emerald Lake Hills community were considered in the cumulative impact assessment in the draft EIR. And that resulted in no greater significant impacts than already concluded with the project. The current status of the draft EIR, as I mentioned, we are currently in the 45-day public comment period. Comments can be mailed in to the Planning and Building Department or emailed to myself. My email is on the screen here. There is an electronic version that's available on the Planning and Building Department's website, on the project page of this website. There's also a print version at the Planning and Building Department office that is available for in-office review. And so just looking at next steps, once the comment period ends, we'll be reviewing all the comments to determine the appropriate responses pursuant to the Sequa guidelines. That will follow by a final EIR that will then be brought to the Planning Commission to consider certification of the EIR and action on the project itself. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. We look forward to any comments from both the Commission as well as the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Questions for Summer? Commissioner Hanson?
Sure. Thank you, Summer. One thing I did notice is when I clicked onto the EIR link you have here, you have it listed twice in your online administrative report. The first link works, but yesterday I tried the last link because I just knew it was at the end of your things. That one doesn't work.
Oh.
So I don't know what's wrong with it.
Okay.
I didn't spend any time trying to figure, but for some reason I had to go to the first listing of it.
Okay, thank
So
you.
that's just an
We'll make sure
administrative
to
thing.
check that when I get back to the office.
My first set of comments is it was a very readable EIR. You know, I've read a number of EIRs over the years, and I really appreciate readability on such a short period. So right off the top, that was great. I do have some comments and questions. And I'm going to hodgepodge all over. For the most part, my comments are minor and not material so far in my thinking, but I just wanted to bring them out.
Sure.
On the weather and climate existing conditions 3.19.1, we refer to things when I read it, basically based in 2002. You know, our perspective at 2002 was that, you know, things are happening. We had people who were denying climate change and things like that. But our perspective today is, no, as far as I know, nobody's have any climate deniers. But the weather portion kind of reflects how we looked back at the turn of the century, looking back at the 80s and stuff like that, whereas today I would look at the climate and say, yeah, that period happened, that's nice, but it's not. But really what has happened in the last 20 years is it's drying out, Our weather is, the rain comes in not only in less amounts, but shorter periods. But when it does come, it's heavier. It is more intense, which then got me back to impact 3.10-4, which is on page 3.10-34, where it's talking about how should there be the unlikely event of a dam failure of 20 feet of water coming down that canyon. And which makes me think of Oroville, which we've always thought that was unlikely, but things come that are very intense now. Overtopping the dam might be something real. And I thought maybe we should start thinking that more likelihood is probably higher than we normally would have anticipated by the way we were looking at the weather at the turn of the century. I just like someone to look at that.
Sure.
If my concerns have any basis, then maybe I'm also looking, well, I took a drive up the canyon. It's narrow. It's a lovely little canyon. But if you park on the things and you had overtopping, you've got vehicles washing down. It kind of narrows down at one point. They could block it up. You would have a temporary dam, then that would release. Maybe we shouldn't be parking cars there. Maybe that's a mitigation measure. I don't know, but something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of wildlife in that canyon. And if we do develop it, where does it go? And particularly, I'm thinking of the deer herds. Okay. I live 2 blocks from El Camino, and I live 2 blocks from San Mateo General Hospital. And this morning I woke up, I got a deer herd in my backyard. Even though that subdivision was built in the 1930s, and I have no idea where they hide during the rest of the year. But today I've got deer herd in my backyard. It's my wife's problem. I'm here. She's got to deal with a stag with horns that's protecting his herd. And I said, good luck. Here's a number to call. So as we develop this canyon, where is this wildlife going? We just kind of ignored it. Are we just hopefully, benign neglect that they just migrate through the canyons, or are we something like that? Are we going to call the herd and to thin it out? I just didn't see something with how we're dealing with the displaced wildlife. A couple other things I saw. Again, this is really minor. We talk about the landline service is provided by SBC. SBC's gone, basically. It's now taken over by AT&T or rebranded as AT&T. And even though I was in the telecom side for a few years, I can't even remember what SBC stood for anymore, other than some big company. The North American history section of 3.5-1 is basically stating everything we knew from the 1970s, of which we say the Clovis period was the oldest events of North American native populations. And that's really, really out of date by now. I don't know if there's any Clovis, pre-Clovis deniers left. But, the oldest artifact what we now have in San Mateo County is a 10,000-year-old element, which is 2,000 years beyond the 8,000 years we have in there. We have Native American populations all over the United States at the 14,000-year level. We've got Chile at 14,000. We have a spot maybe in Florida at 15, maybe a spot in Brazil at 20,000. So it's just out of date, I think. The appendix in F that reference that is more up to date, but it's still 20 years behind. So I don't know that has any material on this, to the findings. It's just, when I read it, I just notice that.
Right.
I'm sure when the public speak, they will sensitize me, things that I might have other questions, so I'll reserve some for later.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of comments.
Go ahead, Commissioner Santa Cruz.
Thank you for Summer. While reviewing the different alternatives, the alternative number 2, which says that you'll accomplish a lot of the objectives, sounds more like a environmentally superior alternative, better option than alternative 1, unless alternative 2, in compared to costing, will be more expensive than alternative 1, which only meets certain objectives of the project. That really brought my attention regarding to why we choosing alternative number 1 as the most environmental superior alternative versus number 2, which is more feasible and make more sense because it meets all the objectives of the project. That's one thing that caught my attention. And the other one is when, and this is, I don't have the experience that Commissioner Hanson has regarding EIR, but when you present an EIR and you guys stated that you have contacted the tribes that for any impact on the area, are you supposed to put together a package of all the letters that they were sent, or this is something that is being done verbally? Or my concern is that anyone who's being impacted is being contacted. Are we having supported documentation for that? Those are the two concerns that I have.
Sure. With regards to the first question that you had regarding the environmentally superior alternative, one of the primary purposes, I think, of the for discussing project alternatives is to identify an alternative that most effectively reduces environmental impacts compared to the project, while also meeting project objectives. But the primary purpose is to identify which alternative could most effectively reduce environmental impacts. And so that's why the alternative 1 was determined to be the environmentally superior alternative, aside from the no project alternative, obviously, because of the two alternatives shown here, alternative 1 and alternative 2, alternative 1, while it only partially meets the project objectives, it does serve the primary purpose of reducing environmental impacts when compared to the project itself, where the annexation alternative, while it doesn't provide any new additional significant impacts, it I guess more or less maintains the project impact, the impacts that would occur compared to the project itself. So they're, I guess, more equivalent, where the alternative 1 actually reduces impacts. And then in regards to the tribal consultations, yes, we do send out, so we contact the Native American Heritage Commission to obtain a list from them as to the Native American tribes that are culturally or traditionally affiliated with a project area. They provide a list to us, and then we send out written letters, are sent certified mail to those contacts, and we go through the Native American Heritage Commission to obtain those lists for each project because they have the most up-to-date contact information that is known of. And so we do send letters out, and we do have copies of those letters that were sent out. We do send them out certified mail, so we receive receipts on their receipt of them by the contact. And then it does include a description of the project, as well as a map showing the project area. And then we identify that, to please reach out to us within 30 days of receipt of that letter to meet the obligations under AB 52.
Okay, yeah, because my observation in this, and excuse my ignorance of this area, but when we talk about the annexation of the alternative to being as an annexation, and we talk about annexation of the project to Redwood City, and I compare the letter that I got from Mr. and Mrs. Casey, where we talk about when they deal with the Redwood City, the cost of the piping and connection of water, it raised up to $217,000. So it's like my curiosity is not selecting alternative 2 had something to do with the $2,000 plus the $217,000 versus the environmentally impact that may cause. That was my only observation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
I have a
Commissioner
question.
Ramirez?
Yeah. On the map that shows the extension of the road, I don't know if you can bring it up. It looks to me that the road does not extend to the last two of the lots that you have on that map. There's the one that has more detail, where you can see how far the road is actually going. So my question is, are we leaving those, at least one lot, the one at the very end, without the benefit of having a road there, or how are they going to access that?
That's correct. So the roadway the improvements of the roadway would terminate as depicted in the gray shaded area here, with the water line extending to loop into Vista Drive. This is what's been proposed by the applicant, and I think this roadway improvement extends to the last parcel that the project applicant owns. In the growth as a growth inducing impact, where we evaluate future developable parcels, we do, I believe, include those other two parcels. And the one parcel is actually, it's not shown here, but it's a little more, where the roadway actually terminates on the south side. There was a merger in the 70s for those two parcels, so that's
So that's
counted
actually
as one.
one. Okay.
And then the last parcel, even though the roadway doesn't extend, utilities, the water line would extend through. And I think a conservative approach, we did include that last parcel as well in the growth inducing impacts that were evaluated throughout the draft
Okay, so
EIR.
All right. I think that explains, because I'm looking at the very last one. I'm thinking, well, that place is still not going to have access. So how are they going to get in and out if they ever develop it? But if it's merged now, I guess it does get to that. So that covers my question. Thank you. No additional questions.
Any questions, Commissioner?
That brought a question to mind for me, the map just before this that we were looking at. So the parcels owned by the applicant that are not proposed for development now are how many?
There are 8 total, and that includes, I believe that includes the one proposed for development. So
So both
It-
sides of the road?
On both sides, yes. There's 3 on the north side. The one where the turnaround is proposed on the north side that encroaches into the parcel that you see on this map, and then 2 on each side. Those 3 are owned by the applicant, and then the majority of the parcels on the south side, with the exception, I think, of the last 2 parcels there.
So
shown in this map.
were any of these owned by the applicant merged before they purchased them, or are any of them substandard? Would they need to be merged, or are all of those buildable sites? Was my question.
A few of them were merged. A few of them have obtained certificate of compliances that have been recorded on them, including the parcel that is proposed with the single-family residence. Staff did require chains of titles for all of the parcels that the applicant does own to review those. And while no development is being proposed currently, which is why you don't see certificate of compliances for those parcels as part of this project scope, in our review of those chains, it was found that the chains would support certificate of compliance type A's on them.
So there are how many that are buildable?
So that would be 8, and I think that includes the one, though, that the applicant is currently proposing to develop. And the one that the applicant is proposing to develop and another parcel that he owns have in the past obtained certificate of compliance type A's already.
Thank you.
So continuing with that question, I'm still not clear. We are talking about 8 parcels being owned by the developer at this time, the applicant. But in the report, we keep referring to 12 parcels. So are the other 4 owned by somebody else?
Yes, the other 4 parcels that could become developable as a result of this project by the applicant are under separate ownership.
Okay. And we've gone through the parcels that the applicant owns. I think it would be clearer for me if you point out the ones that are not owned by the applicant.
Sure. I'm going to approach the screen because I don't think I can.
Okay, please do.
This one, and 2 where the city.
Too closer to the.
Okay, sorry. So it would be this one, which is
Okay.
emerged,
Okay.
and there's one here, and then this is the city-county boundary, and one on the city side. Those are privately owned. The applicant owns this one, this parcel, this parcel, this parcel, this parcel, and these 3 on this side. And the parcels surrounding the ones on the north side, this parcel here, it's not shown on here, but it actually extends up to the other roadway above. That's one parcel, a developed parcel with a single-family residence that's currently in existence. And then the parcel on the north side at the end, on the west side of the applicant's parcels, is also currently developed with the residents and obtains services from the roadway on the to the north of that parcel.
Okay. I think I understand. Thank you.
Sorry, yes.
And the Canyon Lane Road, the extension of that, is that also owned by the applicant? How does that work?
Canyon Lane is a private road. It was, and it was established as a paper street when the original subdivision occurred. I think in the 1920s. It was never improved. The improvements that we see today are from a county sewer installation project in the 80s that went through. So there is existing sewer along here. It was never dedicated or accepted by the Board of Supervisors at the time as a public roadway, so it remains private. And I believe in terms of the actual ownership, I believe it is, and staff may correct me, feel free to correct me, but I believe it is the ownership of the parcels within that subdivision.
Okay, so portions of it kind of fall into each parcel. Is that my understanding is correct? Yes.
You're correct.
Okay. Okay. So the other question, thank you for explaining that. The other question I have was this project always brought by the applicant in this present form, or was the alternative one plan also discussed at that time?
As far as my knowledge, it's this project proposal has, since its development, has been in this form. What brought this project about was the applicant originally applied for a single-family residence on the parcel in orange shown here, and part of that processing of that application is that roadway and utility services are needed to be extended, and so that generated this project, and we've combined it all into one so that you're getting the roadway and utility improvements as well as the house. But so the project that you see here is as it's always been since their original submittal of the different components.
Okay. So if my understanding of this alternative one is correct, it includes only partial improvement and partial utilities up to the home? Partial improvement of the Canyon Lane, I mean?
So alternative one would be a reduced roadway to the extent that it would serve the one residence, as well as it would still need to provide emergency apparatus turnaround and maneuvering. And the water line would still need to be extended through and looped as it is currently configured down to the other roadway along Vista Drive for flow and quality purposes to meet Redwood City standards.
Thank you. Thank you, Summer. Any other questions for Summer? Thank you. So next we have the applicant. Would the applicant like to speak at this time? Please, yes, please come to the mic
You have
and
15
state
minutes.
your name.
Hello, my name is Marguerite Casey, and my husband and I are the applicants. And I wanted you to know that we first purchased property on Canyon Lane back in 1988. We purchased one parcel with the thought of building a home there, and we knew it needed a water line, but it did have sewer, and it had the dirt road that's there, and we assumed that dirt road was the road that accesses the parcel, and that we could use that road. But then after we made some inquiries about putting in a water line, It turned out that it was just very expensive at that time, even though Redwood City did tell us and that we could put in a water line from Glenwood Avenue up to our parcel, which would have been not this parcel, but another one further down we owned, that we could go ahead and do that. But then we didn't do that at that time, unfortunately. But then in early 2011, we bought 4 parcels from a bank foreclosure, and shortly after that, 3 more parcels from private property owners on Canyon Lane, because then we thought if we had more parcels, it would make more sense to develop the property. And so that's why we have purchased those lots. So we have a total of 8 building sites on Canyon Lane, if this were to go through, and there are 4 other property owners that would also be able to develop their properties. This has been going on for a long time, and since 1988 is when we started looking into this. So this has been going on 31 years, and we've been working on this particular project for 8 years, so it's been quite a while. We had the road, and then once we originally bought those properties in 2011, we were told by the county that we would need to improve the roadway and, put in a water line, which we knew. But then once we had the roadway surveyed, we discovered that the paper road is not actually where the road is. It runs through the middle of Garrett Park. So then we needed to discuss with Redwood City actually making the roadway where it currently is, which is the dirt trail that was built by the county when they put in the sewers, which we thought was the real roadway. So what we're doing is we're getting an easement from the city of Redwood City to go through their property to access all of Canyon Lane, all the property owners. So this actually started this long process with this EIR that is really cumbersome. It's 691 pages, and it cost us well over $200,000 just for this EIR. So it's been a pretty expensive project. And like I said, we've been on this task for over 8 years now. We plan to build the roadway to align basically the way it is now, the traveled way, except it is required to put it 20 foot wide, and we need to put a 90-foot fire truck turnaround is why there's that big bulb there, and the bridge required so the fire truck can turn around for fire access. We will put in the water main that loops up to Vista, and we will put the electrical underground. The utilities will all be underground. Let's see what else I have here. And as part of this, we are planning on building a home on the double lot. It's a merged lot. There are some other merged lots on this project as well. Our company, Casey Construction Incorporated, is in the business of doing underground, and we plan on doing this work ourselves. We are general engineering contractors and very experienced in public works projects, and we'll get this project done swiftly and efficiently in as little time as possible once it can be approved. We've tried to address all the concerns of San Mateo County and all the Redwood City, and it's been quite challenging. We wanted to add that we live in Emerald Hills, and my husband's been here for well over 50 years, and I've been living here for 39 years, so we are Emerald Hills residences. And we were drawn to Canyon Lane because it is a beautiful area, and we think it'd be a beautiful place to live. And the homes, I would add, will be not all built at one time. Each one will be built we only plan on building the one home currently, so we're old, and I don't know if we're going to be building much more. I'm in my 70s and my husband's 80, so we're pretty tapped out. So we just believe that, this would be a nice place to live and would add some quality homes to the area. And we want to thank you for the opportunity to talk. talk to you. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them if I
Thank
can.
you. Commissioners, any question? Did you ever consider just doing what is proposed here or what is part of the EIR as alternative one?
I'm not sure I understand alternative one because it would, if we have to do the fire truck turnaround, it would just make the road slightly shorter. I mean, we would, of course, like to put a shorter, narrower road because it would be, less impact and easier to build, but we're required to put that turnaround, that 90-foot turnaround, and go to, which is almost the end of where we are. So I don't think that would change much by that other impact. I think it would just go back maybe 100 feet or something, if even that, or it looks like maybe 50 foot less. So I don't think that would be much difference. I mean, we'd like to make the road narrower. We'd like to do those, leave it the way it is, but we can't. We're required to do that. And if we were in Redwood City, they would even require a larger, bigger road, and you could build bigger houses, so there'd be more impact. So, and I don't
Madam
think
Chair,
Redwood City wants us. So.
perhaps I can try and clarify, and Summer, you might want to add. I think the idea behind alternative one is there would be an alternative fire turnaround located closer to the project site. Am I right, Summer?
Oh, I didn't know about that. So.
Right, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay. So then it would be closer to the first lot, which is...
I don't think you can fit anything in there because we have to go back up across, and that's not our property, so we can't put the fire truck turnaround further up.
So I would assume that in identifying that alternative as a feasible alternative, that our consultants evaluated the feasibility of locating a fire truck turnaround closer to, and must have concluded that it would be feasible. Am I right about that?
And the alternative is not, it's not to infer that it would be the same design, just moved closer, but it could be, it would need to accommodate and meet fire access and turnaround requirements, but it could be different configuration, I guess. And it wouldn't be the same thing, just,
Okay,
shorter.
so it will have to be looked into and redesigned.
Yeah, but we would have to own the property, and we don't own the property there. So
okay.
that would
Understood.
make it a little hard because somebody else may not want a fire truck turnaround on their property, 90 foot. So
Okay. I'm just... I had many questions, but most of them have been answered. So I'm just looking at what else. Since you have owned several parcels right there, have there been over the years any erosion history and any flooding history of those
none
areas?
that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Have been.
So that is not something you are concerned about?
Well, that's not a concern that we have because we have built several homes and we do put in retaining walls, we put in drainage, we put in all these measures so you don't have those problems.
Okay.
And this is a fairly stable area from what I understand. So.
And also it was mentioned in the report that there's kind of limited entry and exit points in that total area in case of any kind of fire, wildfires. Is there any special?
Yeah, it's a fairly short road, so it's you would turn around and get in and out through Glenwood Avenue.
Okay.
And it's, if it's 20 foot wide, that should be fairly significant to be able to get in and out of. We live in Emerald Hills, so we're pretty familiar with the roads up there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Casey. So we are open to the public hearing. Are there any speaker cards?
Yes, there are.
Janet? Please go ahead.
The first one is Robert Jansen.
Hi, I'm Robert Jensen. I live in Emerald Hills for almost 20 years. So I want to paint a picture for you of a disaster in Montecito, California, and its relevance to the development under question. On January 9th, 2018, residents of Montecito were asleep in their beds. Suddenly, a rumbling somewhere between a train and an earthquake woke Marcus Lopez. He saw a massive wave of black mud and debris hit Montecito Creek Bridge at East Valley Road and launched, and then it came down with a curl like a swell and went up again. He was running for his life. Flames shot up from a gas line explosion as rain is pouring down, casting an eerie orange light on the destruction. I think I have some pictures from a Newshawk article about what happened on the deadliest section of Montecito Creek. I recommend that you all read it before you even consider approving this development. 11 people died immediately below the bridge, substantially away from the predicted flood channel, after the bridge became a dam. There's a picture of one of the bridges in Montecito, chock full of wood, and essentially what was a bridge became a dam, and the floodplain that was predicted was no longer the floodplain that the water followed. 23 people, including 2 friends of my parents, died that night. I'm sure you read the news and are somewhat familiar with the tragedy, but I urge you to strongly look at that event. 3 of the 6 houses surrounding my parents' house were destroyed. The bridge in question has still not been repaired almost 2 years later. They finally put a new roadway in. Bridges and floodplains kill unpredictably. Cold Creek, one of the creeks that feeds Montecito Creeks, has 3,600 cubic feet of water per second in a 2017 report. That's the 100-year flow mark. The dam inundation study says that the flow from the dam, were it to release, would be 5765 cubic feet per second. And that's from the geological survey report included with that's substantially faster. That's 25 miles an hour of water, and we're talking a 20-foot inundation plain. Montecito is going back as far as buying properties to create additional debris basins. They're taking properties that were homes, in the and they want to build homes just as much as San Mateo County does, but they're buying back the properties because they don't feel that they're safe. In order to make the residents safer, they're working with FEMA and the state and the county to buy back those homes. That's an extraordinary measure. They don't have all the funding, but you have an opportunity here to prevent that tragedy, to prevent deaths that would be expected from this development by the new Orville Dam regulations in Senate Bill 92 require a new inundation map whenever there's a significant change in the downstream development that involves people and property. That means any environmental review should be based on the inundation map after proposed changes are taken into account, as they will not only change the channel and add bridges, but likely will increase the risk profile of the dam from high risk, 1 to 2 people expected to die, to extremely high risk. Oh yeah, please. Yeah, so just, substantial devastation. I walked it myself going through my parents' property down below. This entire area was covered with trees, much like it looks like a wide open plain now. That's because the trees were swept away by the water and shoved under the bridges. Nino and Moore's geotechnical investigation states that grading changes were not taken into account. That's in the EIR as stated right now. No mention of the impact of bridges on water flow was even mentioned by the engineers, even though they should have been aware more than a year after Montecito that bridges have a substantial impact on the flow channel. So the report, in my professional opinion, is severely lacking in its thoroughness. The geotechnical investigation admits that most of the planned concrete pads are only 1 to 2 feet above the road. That means at minimum they would be 5 feet underwater. And basically, if you walk down that road on Canyon Lane, that sounds like some of you have visited the parcel, at no point when you're walking on the road would your head be above water. If the dams cause the level of the water rise and make the road the new base, your head could be as much as 10 feet underwater. My recommendation is either to truncate the road to only the property in question and ensure the current proposed house is placed way above the inundation plain, or future development places and bridges will each require a new inundation map, or you can propose all the changes at once and try to make it safe. But that means each time a new house is added, especially ones that are bridging the creek, you would have to go through the process of creating a new inundation map because that would no longer be valid. I have more questions, but I can submit them for November.
Thank you.
Next, I have Stephen Gans, followed by Robert Weiss.
Please state your name and if you live in Emerald Hills neighborhood.
Yes, I'm Stephen Gans, and I am a resident of Emerald Hills since 2008. Thank you for the opportunity to state my opposition to this proposal. Both current and future residents of the Emerald Hills community have a right to expect at least a minimal level of assurance from the Planning Commission that our residences are and will be safe. The results of a catastrophic dam failure, as related in this draft report, would be ghastly and well beyond release of pollutants. Upon reviewing them, I trust you will refrain from approving the first piece of a project that would inevitably put many people's lives and property in grave risk. I presented my concerns, as did many others, prior to the issuance of this draft report. In properly classifying at least this one overriding concern as significant and unmitigatable, the authors of the draft EIR have taken an important and courageous step. I call on you to not take this conclusion lightly and, based upon it, to reject the current proposal. That being said, there are numerous problems with both this draft EIR and with the process for considering the proposal. Regarding the draft EIR, several publicly aired concerns were merely reported and not substantively analyzed. Many important issues are thus not getting the opportunity for public review and consideration that they would get were they properly described in this draft. The proposed mitigations are often insufficient to address the problems. Evidence necessary to support the conclusions is often lacking. I cannot describe these issues in the time I have available here, but will do so in written comments. I trust that this commission will not allow the project to move forward without all the relevant facts and conclusions analyzed and then presented again to the public for a full-length comment period. I'll instead focus here on the process, which appears to be irreparably flawed. The applicant has somehow gotten the county to allow him to present his various development parcels for approval in a piecemeal and thus illegal manner. This is not a single residence project, although the area immediately below the dam was marked as lots outside the project area on the map you just saw, the one with the oval. The lots are not currently developed, but their development following this project would be well beyond a potentiality. I warned of the inherent unfairness of this approach during the initial comment period. It forces the Commission to decide with only partial knowledge on moving forward with an infrastructure project that once in place could only be abandoned, leaving a black mark on everybody involved. I understand that the county looked to head off this risk by having the EIR report on reasonably foreseeable impacts of subsequent development. After reviewing the draft EIR, I see that my concerns were well placed and that scoping the EIR in this way has been entirely unsuccessful. The draft EIR makes only a superficial attempt at review of the plans, which have been withheld by the applicant for developing the remaining 11 lots, and instead relies heavily on future studies. The applicant is well aware that by the time the road, sewage, and water mains are in place, such studies will be largely irrelevant. The process, as currently formulated, also allows the draft EIR to circumvent important safeguards in the San Mateo Significant Tree Ordinance and endorses wholesale clearing of mature trees in exchange for replanting saplings. The project requires significant grading variances, and future iterations are likely to require substantially more significant variances with no valid justification and great risk to the canyon, cumulative risk. Certainly, the high-end homes planned for this development cannot be expected to have any impact on the supply of affordable housing. It may seem like a minor point by comparison, but the applicant intends to gate the project area, currently at least a de facto public resource, in violation of regulations requiring public access to creeks. The loss of this resource appears to have been considered out of the scope of the EIR. I'd like to know what the process is for the issue to be properly aired prior to any approval of the project. The proposal is anything but low-impact development of a delicate ecosystem, and even if public access were granted, it would be to an area significantly degraded by this proposal. Thank you. I hope that you take these issues into consideration and reject the proposal.
Thank you.
Robert Weiss, followed by Debbie Parenti.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak and voice my concerns about this project. I'm Rob Weiss. I live in Emerald Hills, and I'm the president of Emerald Lake Country Club. We are the operators of that dam that sits directly above the project area. And as you noted, Commissioner Hanson, the EIR describes that in the event of a catastrophic dam failure, 20 feet of water could flow through that canyon within 3 minutes. So my immediate concern is that the project developer has misrepresented the plan that he's putting in front of this commission. It's not about one home and a roadway. The developer owns 8 parcels in the canyon, and his true plan is to build homes on all of them. Extending the roadway, as the plan calls for, is considered a growth-inducing impact, and California case law clearly states that Mr. Casey cannot piecemeal a project in this way in front of this commission. He's not really talking about one development or the development of one home. He's planning a subdivision, and the EIR should reflect that in all its detail. I'll be happy, and I will cite the relevant court cases in my formal written comments to the commission. The courts have said that Sequa regulations contain not simply procedural requirements, but that they are public information documents. And this draft EIR leaves out numerous details about the construction of 11 more parcels. So the county has wandered into a misrepresentation here. The project before you isn't what the developer has in mind. The whole thing is premised on a fallacy. I'd ask Mr. Casey and Mrs. Casey, what's your plan for the other lots you own, and why haven't you disclosed those plans in detail in this EIR, and in this proposal, I should say. And finally, and I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but if this project is approved as it's presented, it threatens the very existence of Emerald Lake Country Club. Missing from the EIR is any protection for the owners of Emerald Lake Country Club. The owners of Emerald Lake Country Club are like me. I'm one of 50 families that own that lake privately. Every other dam in the county is owned by a municipality, by Stanford University, by special districts, by organizations that have deep pockets and legal protections. We won't have that. We pay a liability premium each year for the insurance that allows us to operate that lake. If 12 homes are built at the bottom of this canyon directly below an earthen dam and 1.5 miles away from an earthquake fault, there will be probably a $50 million liability that will exist that doesn't exist now. And it's quite possible that no carrier will underwrite an insurance policy for us at that point. And that could close down Emerald Lake Country Club, which has existed for 100 years as a recreational asset for the residents of San Mateo County. So I ask you all, if you approve this project, what can you do to protect us against this massive liability? So thank you for listening. and I appreciate the chance to express my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss.
Next is Debbie.
My name is Debbie Parenti. Thank you for letting me express my concerns. I live on Bain Place, adjacent to, with a Glenwood next to me, and I'm right in back of Garrett Park. It's in my backyard. And I'm in opposition to this project, and I'd like to express my concerns. I have 5 concerns. I'll start with the dam and the creek. I, too, am in the line of fire of this dam. I didn't know that when I bought the house, and I talked to somebody in the water department. Yes, they check it every year, but if we have, quote unquote, the big one, you don't know what's going to happen to that dam, and it could just come right our way. The creek has overflowed twice into my property. My hot tub was lifted up twice. The first time I paid $2,000 to reinstate it, and then the second time I just let it go. I'm not going to keep paying if this creek keeps overflowing. My neighbors, their whole bottom part of their house was inundated with water. Okay, so that's my one concern. The other concern I have is the construction and the traffic and the congestion while they're developing this property. Now, you say it's temporary. Well, what is temporary in the whole scheme of things? Is it a month? Is it a year? Is it 4 years? How long is it going to take to do all that you say you're going to do and build 12 homes? It's right next to the park, Garrett Park. Children play there every single day. Now, are we going to have fumes and dust and noise for the little children? Are they even going to want to go to this park? Secondly, I wrote all this down. Okay, it is a deer habitat. The deer, that's their little place. It's right next to the creek. I have a picture of a buck sitting in this area. I mean, Redwood City is being built up like a metropolis. Can't we have one little area, just one little green belt that's beautiful with trees, and the deer can go there and whatever animals, and also cutting down 34 trees. In Redwood City, if I'm correct, if you have a tree on your front yard, you have to get permission to cut it down and put a new tree there. And now suddenly you could just chop down 34 beautiful trees that we all look at. It's part of the beauty of where we live. And okay, then the next thing I want to talk about is, let's see here, the water availability. Every time there's a drought, and as you said, with this climate change, you don't know what's going to happen next around here. We probably will have another drought. We had water rationing. I could only water my plants, my yard, every so many days. I could only use so much water. This is 12 more houses in this area that's going to consume a lot of water. I mean, it's going to be like Mexico City pretty soon, where you can only take a shower once a week. I mean, you've got to think of the future. That's what's getting me with all these things. It's the impact of today and the impact of the future. And, housing availability. So people, they say, well, we need housing for families. Yes, we do need housing for families. I have children who can't even live here because they can't afford to live here. The new houses going up in my area, they're going for $2.5 and $3.5 million. You tell me how many families could afford those kind of homes. So basically, it's environmental, it's noise pollution, and the neighbors. I mean, this Glenwood, there's a lot of people in Glenwood. There's a lot of people on Bain. This is going to really be an intrusion because this is not like building one house. And the creek, I'm concerned about this creek. Is pollutants going to go into this creek as they're constructing all this? Because the creek is right there. And keep in mind, this creek gets very full in the winter. When we have these bad floods, you can't believe it becomes like a river. So anyway, that's all I have to say. And I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ms. Parenti.
Those are all the speakers I had.
No, Ms. Sequa. So in that case, we'll... please come to the podium, state your name. You have 5 minutes, and later on, please fill a speaker card.
Oh, very good. Sorry, I didn't know the format. Hi, my name is Steve Vaughn. I live in Emerald Hills. I'm actually one of the homeowners who's very close to this project and have a view just over the project that's being developed. I think like the other people have spoken here, I'm very concerned about the project. I am for development in general. I think we do need development, but I think this project is, as conceived at least, is a very poor design. For several reasons for that. Certainly the dam issue, I think, is the biggest one that I see. I live right there. I walk that road sometimes, and any house on the upper end where that bulb out is going to be and beyond will be wiped out. Where the house is being proposed is not so bad on the uphill side a little bit. I think there could be mitigations to potentially put a house or two or three on the uphill side there near my property, which is overlooking that. But I build that big road and dam, and you're going to have serious issues there if that ever wipes out. And like everyone has said, that's an ancient dam. Built in the 20s, I think, with near ozone, so just risky for that way. Additionally, I think that is a really beautiful, where I sit, there are deer in my backyard and in this area that we're talking about on some of the parcels on a regular basis. They use it to get over from up in the hills, Edgewood Park, down into the, I guess it's a Hetch Hetchy easement. And it's a nice corridor along there for a lot of animals to go through. It's certainly for the waterway, but also I don't see the creek that much, but I see the deer all the time, as well as other animals. And it's a really good corridor that facilitates the animals to come and go. I'm not a big fan of deer, but there are a ton of them up there, and that's one of their major corridors to get in and out of that area. I also think that Redwood City and the county, my recommendation would be if built at all, would be a much smaller footprint, and preferably not build it and try to buy out the parcels and make it a additional extend to Garrett Park and the pathways that run along the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir there to have a nice area for people to kind of get up into the oak and that little area behind my house there. It's a really beautiful area, and it would be a good extension to that area as well. Beyond that, I don't have too much to say other than a lot of the local kids use that area quite a bit. They go to Edgewood Park, they go up there and hang out, smoke pot and stuff, shoot off fireworks, unfortunately. But it's kind of a local community resource, as it were, for people. And I think you would lose a lot of that. I also really don't like the idea that this is proposed as one house and a road. I really think they're going to build all the parcels. I live right above that. On the bulb out parcel that they're going to build that bulb out right below my house. They would have to build a house, which is very steep at that part of the canyon. They'd have to build that house up the hill, potentially undermining the foundation of my garage where I live personally. That would be a big problem for me, and I think several of those parcels will be very problematic as you go further up the canyon. I think the ones towards the base, towards the park, not so much for fire risk and flood risk, but they will mitigate, they will impact the animal migration. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more speaker. Please state your name.
Thank you. My name's Elise Dixon. I was born and raised here in Redwood City, and I agree with much of the opposition that's already been voiced, so I won't repeat any of that. Two additional issues that I would share with you is, as an educator, I own a learning center here in Redwood City. What's been taken from students and children in Redwood City over the last 10 years in light of development, you've seen many recreational components of the community go away. Bowling, Redwood City, and the country club there that services kids and students all summer long and throughout the course of the year, I think is at risk with this development. So that is my primary concern. And I am one of the 50 owners also of the lake, so I will disclose that. So I think that keeping that open area for children and having more recreation as we watch so much recreation be eradicated here in Redwood City due to development, here is an opportunity for us to maintain access to outdoor recreation area here in Redwood City. The second point that I have is I would love to have this commission or another commission. Rick Hunter sits on Redwood City Planning Commission, and he isn't here today. And he lives next to Garrett Park. So he is specifically affected by the development. And I think any annexation to Redwood City, plays a part in why, how those commissions come together and how that affects him directly. Mel Casey and his wife have had a history of building in Emerald Hills, and I would like to see those houses looked at. those houses leak. He has a history of leak and drainage issues. Mr. Santa Cruz, I see you looking over that way. I know they wrote a letter to you. But I think that if you look at the historic houses that the Caseys have built in our community, they have drainage issues and they leak. And now we're going to have him and his organization build homes in an area that has water components that haven't been looked at the EIR above a dam from a developer who has a long history of homes that leak and have drainage issues. Thank you very much for registering my opposition to this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something. My name is Casey.
We have to come up to the podium, sir.
Microphone. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, my name is Casey, and I want to say something about the last lady who came up here to speak.
Please state your name.
Casey, C-A-S-E-Y.
Thank you.
I built houses in Emerald Hills, and none of them that I've heard of have fallen down lately. So I can assure you that we build nice houses. But that park, I'll just give you one example of this. That little park, I like that little park, and I have a vested interest in it. Because when the county, or whoever it was who divided up that property out there, they gave an easement for me to use to go up to my land. And about 30 years ago, the city of Redwood City, they decided that they were going to make a park there. So, and it's a nice park, and I like it. The problem is that when they put the park in, I own the park. Because the easement for my land goes right through that park. And who do you think is complaining about it? I gave them an easement through the park so they could keep their park. So you need to hear both sides of the story here. The guy who's running this dam up there, this dam is about, the water level gets up to about 4 or 5 feet. And I used to swim in that pond all the time. It's a pond. And when you dive into that thing, if you go down 4 feet, you're going into mud. So I don't know where it's going to go to. The other item is that it took me 2 years. If you want to worry about hazardous encounters, when I started researching the property that we own, I discovered that that dam across there had never been inspected by the county. They had no record of ever even dealing with it. So I forced them, and they had an inspection on it. So we found out that we went to the state of California, and we wanted to see a copy of this safety inspection that the state did. And the state would not give me a copy of it because they said it was paid for by the owners of the dam. So that's a good indication that they're trying to hide this thing. This guy with this lake here, he's making money off of this pond. There are all kinds of people go out there. It's a private pond. They have finally, I did after like 3 years, get a certificate. I went to the state and I had the state release the results of their inspections after this guy fought it all the time, and it still hasn't been fixed. So a lot of people come up here and start talking and how bad we are, but they should look at home.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. We had somebody else. Please come to the mic. Have you filled out a speaker card? Okay, please do that afterwards.
Hi, my name is Adam Azarks. I moved to Emerald Hills very recently, just this spring actually. So there's clearly a lot of history about this development that I'm not a part of, but I do live very near where this is going to be happening. To the point about the deer, when I first came to look at homes in the area, I saw some deer just walking past in some of these undeveloped parcels, took a picture, and that's when I knew that I was going to be moving there. Some of them sleep in the creek there, in fact. I don't have objections to development in general, or even most of this project. My main concern is about that bridge over the creek, especially given the inundation risk. I noted in the environmental impact report there were some probabilities listed for earthquakes of various magnitudes. The magnitudes that were specified there were very high ones, and so the probability was listed as being fairly low. But there are lower magnitude events with significantly higher probabilities, which are still possible. Which, given the proximity of the fault to the dam, they could still cause an issue. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Anybody? Yes.
Perhaps you want to close the public hearing, and then I will have some comments to make.
Thank you, Steve. So barring none, no more speakers, we close the public hearing. Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted, from the staff's perspective, to thank everyone for coming today. Clearly, there are some significant environmental issues and legitimate concerns regarding this project. We will make every effort to respond to those as best we can in the final EIR. I did want to address some characterizations that were made about the county in this regard and try and clarify the record in that issue. So there was one speaker who said that this project is really a subdivision and that it was being misrepresented. And so I want to clarify that these were legally created lots, so the subdivision already exists. Now, the other assertion was made that the county made some sort of mistake or error in accepting this proposal and moving forward with an EIR without having plans for all of the lots. And we have limited authority, and I'll look to council to confirm this, but I would say probably no authority to require that a private property owner submit plans for developing a lot that they don't intend to develop at this time. So we're not trying to hide the ball in any way. We are responding to the proposal that has been submitted by the applicant, and we are doing our best to address the environmental issues that will result from the project, which does include future development of the vacant lots there. Now, we acknowledge that when those lots are proposed for development in the future, they're very well may need some additional environmental review. So we have taken the environmental review as far as we can based on the applicant's proposal. We've done our best to consider the future development that will be enabled by the road, and we've acknowledged that that future development will be subject to additional review for compliance with Sequa. So while this might not be the perfect process we would like to see, it's the process that the applicant has requested and that we don't have the ability to reject. So that concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Did anybody have questions first?
So Steve, basically to sum up what you said is, my understanding, this is an environmental review. We're not here to prove or disprove the project. We're here to make sure we consider all the environmental issues to be evaluated at the time of the project. And that this environmental review basically leaves the potential of n number of lots developable. We're assuming that they would become available, but we have no idea of the specifics. But we know that maybe that has a range of this many people, this many cars, and those are considered.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
Would commissioners
I'm sorry.
have any
Go
other
ahead.
question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Mr. Fox can add a little more knowledge and I think understanding to some of the legal questions that have been coming up.
Sure. First of all, welcome to Sequa for some of you. Others I know have much experience with this. Sequa is an analytical tool that's used by agencies so that they act more wisely with regard to the environmental impacts of the projects that they approve. It's designed to be a tool in that it brings forward information that prior to Sequa being adopted here in California, and it's been many, many decades, got short shrift. And so it's an extensive analysis of what impacts might flow from a project. And as you heard, there are various tiers of environmental review that could occur on a project, and we scale the extent of environmental review to the scale of the project. This project involves the most extensive form of environmental review available under Sequa in the form of an EIR. That said, EIRs analyze what the planner and the environmental consultant and some members of the public identify as potential impacts from a project. And so we study what people bring forward as potential issues that might flow from the ultimate approval of a project. And this process is designed to allow the public to weigh in on items that they don't think have been handled at all in the EIR, or items that they don't think were adequately handled. And that ultimately will be a decision by staff whether to go back and make adjustments to the document before bringing you the actual permits. Because the Sequa process is designed to assist a particular decision. And in this case, it's a series of permits that have to be issued for the project that is applied for. And that's what I'm going to turn to next. Applicants are allowed to apply for things that they would like to do. They generally cannot be made to apply for things that they don't want. So generally speaking, the idea that we can tell the developer, we will not process your permit for what you've applied for because we think you should also apply for these other things, can only be true if those relate to permits that are tied to the particular project. So as Steve identified, the scope of the project is to build what the applicant proposes to build and has asked for permits for. Now, at an early stage of this project, we faced a decision about whether or not to simply study only the thing that was proposed by the applicant or the foreseeable impacts of what would happen in the area if the project were developed. And we went with that larger scope. So the EIR analyzes the cumulative impacts of the other, they can be called growth-inducing impacts, although that's not really what this is. But the EIR sought to evaluate what would happen environmentally with the development that's proposed, including the flow-on effects of those other lots being developed. So staff undertook a broader scope than might have been undertaken because they believed that that was the appropriate thing to do. And so when you make your decision, ultimately, when the permit is brought to you for a decision, the EIR will have attempted at least to describe for you all the environmental impacts that are likely to flow from that development. So I hope that adds some context to what has been presented here today, and I'm available to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Steve, so all the questions that were raised today and those potentially raised in letters and communications to the office will be specifically laid out in the final EIR and addressed in some form?
Yes, with the understanding that there were probably statements made that don't relate to environmental impacts at all. So any comments or concerns relevant to the environmental impacts of the project will for sure be addressed. And we thank the public for sharing those. Yes, and recognized. Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any comment? Is that all that
Yes,
we are looking
this is
for
just
at
an
this time?
information item, and at this point, if you've gotten the information you needed, we could move on to the next matter.
Would anybody like to add anything in here? Just some of my concerns that I feel should be addressed moving forward. Is one of the things is the condition of the bridge that I think one of the speakers also mentioned, and I would like to make sure that that is included in the EIR next time. Any data on flooding of the dam, just to pacify the neighbors as well as the community there, that it is safe to build. Okay, so these are, and any further erosion history or any kind of measures that could be taken, either mitigation or whatever that could be taken to make sure that that has been accounted for. Okay. Thank you. So the
No motion is
required. So we'll take a break at this time, and we'll be back shortly.
Yes, that's my boss. I have a talking about our